Long ago, before time began to measure kings by coins and crowns, there lived a queen whose name has long since been swallowed by silence. Her story, however, still lingers in the wind, softly spoken in forest clearings, murmured in market alleys, and sometimes sung by grandmothers to children who cannot sleep. It is not her name people remember but the thing she left behind, a necklace. They call it the Queen's necklace, though some say it never truly belonged to her. It was forged on a night of sorrow, when the Queen's heart broke so deeply that even the stars turned their faces away. Betrayed by those she loved most, her sister, her husband, her court, she was cast from her throne with chains made not of iron but of lies. No one wept for her, save the earth beneath her bare feet and the sky that heard her scream. The necklace, legend says, was not crafted by hands but born from pain. A single teardrop, fallen from her cheek, struck the cold marble floor and crystallized where it landed. From that gem, strange and glimmering, grew a chain of gold so thin and bright it looked like sunlight frozen in place. The Queen wore it only once, on the night she vanished. Some say she walked into the sea. Others swear she turned to smoke. But all agree, the necklace remained. Over centuries, the Queen's necklace appeared and disappeared in curious ways. No one could claim it for long. It would slip from locked chests, vanish from royal necks, and reappear in the strangest places, beneath the pillow of a scullery maid, inside the folds of a widow's shawl, or tangled in the hair of a crying child. And wherever it went, stories followed. They say the necklace does not bring luck, but balance. Those who wear it with cruel hearts find their power drained, their secrets exposed, their voices silenced. Kings have fallen while wearing it. Tyrants have lost their minds. But those who are broken, beaten, or bound, when they wear it, something inside them awakens. They speak with courage, move with grace, and seem to carry the strength of 1,000 voices behind every step. No one knows what force lives inside the Queen's necklace. Is it the Queen herself? A spirit of justice? Or merely magic with a taste for fairness? The scholars argue. The priests deny it. But the people, the ordinary folk, they believe. They believe because they've seen what happens when the necklace chooses. And that is the thing to remember: it cannot be bought. It cannot be stolen. It cannot be forced to shine. The Queen's necklace chooses who wears it. And when it does, the world shifts, just a little, just enough, for justice to bloom like a thorn in the heart of power. And somewhere tonight, it glows softly in the dark, waiting. Leora did not remember her parents. Her earliest memories were of cold stone floors, rough hands, and whispered commands. She had grown up inside the palace of Arader, but not as a child of nobility or even a servant's daughter. She belonged to no one, and yet everyone acted as though she belonged to them. She was a slave. From the moment she could walk, she had been ordered to scrub, sweep, serve, and vanish. Her name was barely used, and when it was, it came wrapped in bitterness or mockery. Leora, faster. Leora, watch your clumsy feet. Stupid girl, look what you've done. Her hands were always raw. Her back always sore. And yet she never cried where others could see. That was the first lesson she had ever learned. Never give them the satisfaction of your tears. The nobles of Arader treated her like furniture, present but ignored unless she made a mistake. Then they noticed her. Then they laughed. Or worse, sneered. Among them all, one name stirred fear and anger inside her more than any other: Lady Velis. Lady Velis was not queen yet, but she acted as if the crown already glistened on her head. She was tall and beautiful, with hair the color of burning copper and a voice as smooth as silk dipped in poison. To the court, she was charm itself, graceful, intelligent, and powerful. But to Leora she was a nightmare. Velis had made a game out of humiliating Leora. She would call her in front of guests just to point out her worn-out clothes or push her to spill wine for amusement. Once, during a winter feast, Velis ordered Leora to stand barefoot in the snow just to see how long it would take before she cried. She never did. But her feet bled. The laughter still echoed in her head sometimes, louder than the wind. "Look at her," Velis would say, smiling sweetly as if discussing the weather. "So silent, so obedient. Like a little dog. Maybe I'll teach her to dance next." Others laughed. No one stopped her. That was how power worked in the palace. It fed on silence. Yet even in silence, Leora's eyes missed nothing. She watched. She listened. She remembered who was kind in small ways and who wasn't. She learned which doors creaked, which guards fell asleep, and which rooms were left unlocked. She learned not to speak unless spoken to, but inside her mind she spoke constantly. Her thoughts were sharp, observant. She knew she was not stupid. She just had to pretend. Some nights, after her work was done and the halls were still, Leora would crawl into the little space beneath the servants' stairs and close her eyes. Sleep came hard. But when it did, it brought her strange dreams. They always began the same way: a woman in a silver gown standing under moonlight, her face hidden by a veil, her shoulders trembling as she cried. Around her, the sky shimmered like glass, and a wind blew that seemed to carry sorrow and strength in equal measure. The woman never spoke, but her presence filled the air like a song. Sometimes she would raise her head, and just before the dream faded, Leora would see a flicker of something around her neck, something glowing, something ancient. A necklace maybe. Or a light shaped like one. The dreams left her with a strange ache in her chest. Not fear. Not sadness exactly. Something deeper. A connection she couldn't name. She didn't tell anyone. Who would listen to a slave girl dreaming of veiled women and moonlight? Despite everything, Leora held on to kindness. She helped the younger servants when they were overwhelmed. She left extra bread where the kitchen girls could find it. She spoke gently to the palace animals, especially the old gray cat that followed her like a shadow. No one thanked her. No one noticed. But it mattered to her. Her kindness was the one thing that still belonged to her. No one could take it, not even Velis. One rainy afternoon, as she was scrubbing the grand hall's floors, a nobleman passed by and accidentally kicked over a goblet of wine. It spilled across her freshly cleaned tiles. He sneered and kept walking. Leora paused just for a second, watching the red stain spread like blood. In that moment she wondered, not for the first time, why the world allowed such things. Why some were born to silk and others to chains. Why truth and kindness were seen as weaknesses. And why her dreams felt more real than the life she lived. She said nothing. She kept scrubbing. Later that evening she passed by a mirror in the hallway, one of the tall, gilded ones meant to reflect the glory of gowns and jewels. She glanced at her reflection. Her face was thin, her eyes too large for her small frame, her hair tangled and dull. But her eyes held something. Not just weariness. Something quiet. Something waiting. She kept walking. That night, after she had cleaned the last floor, folded the last sheet, and eaten the last crust of bread from the kitchen scraps, she sat alone by the servants' fire and watched the embers glow. The heat barely reached her skin. But the light danced in her eyes. She picked up a piece of charcoal and began drawing in the ashes. She didn't know what she was drawing until it appeared, a necklace. Not just any necklace, the one from her dreams. The delicate gold chain. The tear-shaped gem. She stared at it, her finger trembling slightly. She had never seen it in real life. But it felt real. Far beneath the palace, in a forgotten chamber sealed by time and dust, something ancient stirred. Something golden. Something waiting. The necklace had felt her. It had heard her dreams. And it had begun to awaken. The storm had rolled in suddenly, darkening the skies above the kingdom of Arata with thick, churning clouds. Rain beat against the palace windows like impatient fingers tapping to be let in. Leora had been sent to clean the western wing, a quiet and used part of the palace where few dared to wander anymore. Most claimed it was cursed, though no one ever said why. The air there always felt different. So heavy. The lanterns didn't seem to burn as brightly. Even her footsteps, usually soft, seemed to echo longer than they should. But Leora did not complain. She preferred it to the jeers and laughter of the main court. Silence at least did not humiliate her. As she worked, she noticed something odd near the base of a crumbling statue, one of a long-forgotten queen whose face had been worn away by time. A small crack in the wall. No larger than her palm. Dust clung to it like a secret. She brushed it gently and felt something shift. A click. The floor beneath her trembled ever so slightly, and a draft of cold air brushed past her ankles. The statue creaked, then slowly slid backward, revealing a narrow stone staircase curling down into darkness. Her breath caught. Curiosity warred with fear in her chest. She hesitated, her eyes darting around. No one was nearby. No one ever was in the west wing. Slowly, carefully she stepped inside. The air grew colder as she descended, thick with the scent of old stone and something else. Something faintly sweet and metallic, like the memory of blood. The stairway ended in a wide chamber lit only by thin rays of light filtering through cracks in the ceiling. Dust danced in the beams like tiny spirits. Shelves lined the walls, filled with strange relics. Broken crowns, shattered mirrors, rusted daggers, and faded scrolls. Time itself seemed to sleep in this room. But at the very center, on a pedestal of black marble, lay a necklace. It shimmered even in the low light, its gold chain twisted like strands of sunlight braided into thread. The gem was shaped like a teardrop, a deep, soft red that pulsed gently, as if it had a heartbeat. Leora stepped closer, drawn in by something she couldn't name. Her fingers reached out, trembling. Then she heard it. A whisper. Not outside. Inside her mind. Not yet. She stumbled back, her heart pounding. The air grew thick. The whispers multiplied, curling through her thoughts like smoke. Remember. Wait. Choose. Her knees gave out and she fell backward, her hands scraping against the stone floor. The whispers grew louder, layered, as though 100 voices were speaking all at once in a forgotten language that somehow still made sense. Terrified, she scrambled to her feet and ran up the stairs, nearly tripping in her panic. She didn't stop until the statue had closed behind her, hiding the passage as if it had never opened at all. She pressed her back to the cold wall, gasping for breath, her heart still echoing the strange rhythm of the necklace's pulse. She told no one. That night, sleep came quickly, not from comfort but exhaustion and fear. And again the dream returned. The woman in the silver gown stood beneath the moon, but this time her veil was lifted. Her face was pale and regal, eyes dark with sorrow but unyielding. Her mouth moved, and this time, Leora heard her voice, not a whisper but a clear tone that rang like bells in the night. When you wear what once bled, you shall bleed none again. Then her hand reached out, and the necklace glowed like fire in her palm. It hovered between them, burning bright and red and alive. Leora awoke with a gasp. Sweat soaked her shirt. Her fingers were curled into fists, gripping the edge of her blanket as if she'd been holding something tightly in her sleep. But her hands were empty. She stared into the dark, heart racing, the dream clinging to her like smoke. She didn't know what the queen meant. She didn't know why the whispers had found her, or what the necklace wanted. All she knew was this: it was real. And somehow, for reasons she couldn't explain, it was calling to her. The great hall of Arader had never gleamed so brightly. Crystal chandeliers sparkled from high vaulted ceilings, casting golden light across polished floors and gleaming silverware. Walls were draped in silks dyed the deepest crimson and embroidered with the royal crest, a lion with a serpent curled at its feet. Every inch of the palace had been scrubbed, dusted, and prepared for the evening's celebration, a banquet in honor of the visiting lords from the northern provinces. Trumpets blared. Laughter rang. Perfume thickened the air until it was nearly hard to breathe. And Leora stood in the shadows, wearing rags. Her tunic, a coarse linen smeared with soot, clung to her skin. Her feet were bare. She was not permitted shoes. Lady Velis had insisted that a slave girl clattering through the hall would sour the wine. Her hair had not been combed in days. Her hands were red with scrubbing and burns. She was to serve. Nothing more. Bring out the goblets, Leora, the steward barked. And hold your head down. Don't shame the hall with your eyes. She obeyed. Guests arrived in waves, gowns sweeping like river water, jewels flashing like stars. Leora weaved through them quietly, unnoticed until something went wrong. And something always went wrong. A noblewoman snapped her fingers for more honeyed wine. A man spilled chicken grease on the floor and laughed as Leora knelt to clean it with her sleeve. Plates clattered, feet stomped, and everywhere eyes watched with disdain. Then Lady Velis entered. The room shifted when she did. Conversation paused. Heads turned. She wore a gown of gold silk stitched with silver vines. Her copper hair was braided into a crown upon her head. She smiled at the applause, dipping in a graceful, practiced bow. And then her eyes found Leora. Ah, she said loudly, her voice clear and smooth like poured oil. There's our little helper. Leora stiffened. Velis approached with the elegance of a dancer and the cruelty of a blade. She plucked a glass of wine from a tray and looked down at Leora as though she were examining a stain. Still crawling about, I see, she murmured, just loud enough for the nobles nearby to hear. Didn't I ask you to look presentable tonight? Oh, but how could you? You don't even know what that word means. A ripple of laughter. Leora said nothing. She stared at the ground. Velis stepped closer. You know what I think, dear? She continued, swirling her wine. I think you should offer a toast. Yes. A toast to the fine guests of Arader. Come, kneel. Leora hesitated. Velis's voice sharpened. I said kneel. Slowly Leora sank to her knees. She held up the tray, arms trembling. Velis leaned down, smiling. Now pour it over your head. The hall fell silent. No one moved. Even the laughter had stopped. Leora looked up just for a second. Her eyes met Velis's. Something deep inside her shifted. Velis narrowed her eyes. Do it, girl. Show them how obedient you are. With shaking hands, Leora tilted the tray. The goblet slid. Red wine spilled over her head, dripping down her face and soaking her tunic. It stained her like blood. Gasps scattered through the crowd. Then a burst of laughter, louder this time. Cruel. Endless. One noble clapped mockingly as if congratulating a fool for a trick well done. Velis straightened, triumphant. "Look at her," she said, gesturing broadly. "Isn't she charming? Our own little wine fountain." Leora remained kneeling. The wine ran down her cheeks into her mouth. It tasted bitter. She kept her head down. Not out of submission, but to hide her face. Because she was no longer crying. She was burning. Not with shame. Not even with pain. But something colder, clearer. Like ice forming beneath her skin. Her fingers dug into the tray, her heart thudding not with fear but purpose. Rage quiet, careful, watching. She stood slowly, wine dripping from her clothes. No one noticed the way her shoulders squared, or how her spine seemed straighter. They were too busy laughing, drinking, forgetting her once more. But the moment had already happened. Later that night, as she scrubbed the banquet floor, her back aching, her hands raw, she replayed it over and over in her mind. The look in Velis's eyes. The silence before the laughter. The sting of red down her face. But most of all, the silence after. The moment when she didn't cry. When she didn't shatter. She had bent, yes. But she had not broken. The fire had kindled. And though she didn't know it yet, far beneath the palace stones, in the secret place where the past still whispered, the queen's necklace glowed brighter than ever. It had felt her pain. And it remembered. The bruises didn't show under her clothes, but Leora could feel every one of them. After the banquet, she had been dragged aside by the steward for disrupting the dignity of the hall. His belt had found her back, his boots her ribs. No one had questioned it. No one ever did. She had tasted blood in her mouth as she cleaned her wounds alone in the laundry cellar. Her fingers trembled. Her lip was split. One eye swelled slowly shut. But she said nothing. She made no sound. When the palace finally went quiet, and the nobles had all slipped away into silken sleep, Leora slipped away too. Out through the kitchens, past the old servants' gate and into the garden. The moon lit her path. It had rained earlier and everything glistened with silver. The roses were in bloom, dark, full and heavy with scent, but she barely saw them. Her steps were slow. Staggered. One hand clutched her ribs. The other wiped away tears she hadn't meant to cry. She wasn't sure why she came to the garden. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the moonlight. Maybe it was the statue. At the garden's center stood the old figure, weathered stone wrapped in ivy half broken by time. No one remembered who it was meant to be. Some said a forgotten noblewoman. Others whispered it had once been a queen erased from history. Her face was smooth from erosion, her eyes hollow, her hands folded over a chipped pedestal. Leora reached her and collapsed at her feet. Her knees hit the dirt. Her hands dug into the earth. And finally she let go. The sobs came, wild, shaking, wordless. Her body curled in on itself, shoulders racked with pain she could no longer hold back. She didn't cry for the nobles. Or Velis. Or even herself. She cried because it was all too much. The years. The silence. The loneliness. She cried like the girl in her dreams. The one who stood beneath the moon and never spoke. She didn't notice the weight in her satchel at first. She had dropped it beside her when she fell, and now it bulged oddly, heavier than it should have been. Her breath caught as she wiped her eyes and opened the flap. Inside, where there had been only rags and cloth scraps, something gold shimmered. Leora froze. Was there. The necklace. She hadn't taken it. She knew she hadn't. She hadn't gone near the vault since that terrible day. She hadn't spoken of it, hadn't even let herself dream of it again. But here it was. The gold chain gleamed softly in the moonlight, coiled like sunlight in her bag. The gem in the center pulsed slowly, like the heartbeat of something sleeping but not dead. Her hand hovered over it. She should have been afraid. She should have run. But she didn't. With trembling fingers, she lifted the necklace and placed it around her neck. It was warm. Instantly, the world shifted. The wind stilled. The garden seemed to hold its breath. And then, the whispers came again. But this time they weren't just whispers. They were voices. Clear. Echoing inside her skull and all around her at once. Gentle. Fierce. Ageless. Daughter of silence. Child of chains. You are heard. Leora's body trembled. Her skin prickled. Her mind reeled. The pain in her ribs faded. The ache in her legs vanished. She looked down and gasped. The blood on her hands was gone. Her bruises had disappeared. Even the torn skin on her palms had smoothed. She stood up slowly, eyes wide. The necklace lay against her collarbone like it had always belonged there. She looked up at the statue. The hollow eyes seemed deeper now. Watching. Understanding. Leora whispered, "What are you?" And for a moment in the quiet of the garden, the statue's shadow seemed to nod. By dawn, Leora's bruises were gone. Her cuts had healed. Even the ache in her back had vanished, as though her body had forgotten it had ever been hurt. The necklace still rested against her skin, hidden beneath her tunic. It pulsed faintly from time to time, not enough to glow but enough for her to feel it like a second heartbeat. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't dare. But something had changed. She could feel it. The first sign came when she returned to the kitchens. The head cook, Mistress Jorna, was shouting at a younger servant for dropping a tray of dried herbs. Her voice was harsh, rising like a storm. But as Leora passed by, the woman's words wavered. She's no good, this girl no better than—" Jorna paused mid-sentence, her hand raised to slap the girl's cheek. Her face twitched strangely. She turned her head toward Leora, eyes narrowing, as if she had heard a sound from deep inside her own thoughts. Then, without a word, she dropped her hand and walked away. Leora said nothing. But inside, her heart was racing. Later that day she heard another voice, but not aloud. She had passed the laundry room where two maids were speaking in hushed tones. One said, "The prince won't last the winter, he's too sick." The other nodded, adding, "They'll blame the food, but—" But before she finished, Leora heard something different. Not the spoken words. Something beneath them. What? The knowledge passed through her like a shiver. She didn't know how she knew, only that she did. It wasn't the food. It wasn't sickness. It was something else, poison. Slowly, carefully done. That night, she lay in her cot beneath the servants' stairs and stared at the ceiling, heart pounding. She had heard no voices. Yet she had understood the truth. She closed her eyes and the dream returned. The queen stood alone in a cold room, betrayed. She was surrounded by shadows, familiar faces twisted in treachery. Her sister, beautiful and cruel. Her husband, silent with guilt. Her advisors, speaking in circles while tightening the noose around her name. "I trusted you," the queen whispered in the dream. "I gave you everything." The faces did not respond. They melted into darkness. Only the queen remained, her hand clutching her necklace, her expression hardened by grief. And then she turned, and looked directly at Leora. "You carry what I could not finish." Leora woke in sweat, her fingers clenched tightly around the pendant at her chest. The days passed and the powers grew. She began to feel the weight of people's intentions when they spoke. Kindness felt warm like candlelight. Lies chilled her skin. Cruelty throbbed in her temples like a distant bell. She could predict the moments when someone meant to strike. She could move just fast enough to avoid it. Her reflexes were sharper. Her instincts never missed. Then came the shadows. One evening, when she crept through the outer halls with a tray of stolen fruit she meant to share with the younger kitchen girls, she heard footsteps, guards on patrol. No time to hide. Fear gripped her chest. But the shadows in the hall stretched unnaturally, like reaching fingers. And as she stood still, holding her breath, the shadows wrapped around her, soft and slow, cloaking her from view. The guards passed. Didn't look. Didn't speak. Didn't see. When she looked down again, the shadows slithered away like smoke. She dropped the fruit that night. She barely noticed. Her heart wouldn't stop hammering. Her knees wouldn't stop shaking. She wasn't just sensing things now. She was bending them. Yet with each new ability the dreams deepened. The queen's betrayal played again and again in her sleep, but it changed each time. She began to feel emotions that weren't hers: rage, grief, powerlessness. She felt herself standing in cold marble chambers, wearing gowns made of silk and steel, listening to whispered plans behind closed doors. In one dream she stood before a throne as her sister, twin in blood, cruel in heart, tore the crown from her head. "You love the people more than the crown," the sister sneered. "So let them mourn you." In another, she was locked in a tower, holding the necklace, whispering into it like it was the only friend she had left. "May my suffering not be wasted," she murmured. "May it awaken in the next who carries me." Sometimes Leora woke up crying and didn't know why. She no longer believed these were just dreams. They were memories, but not hers. And that terrified her. What was she becoming? She still used her powers carefully. Quietly. She turned away cruel hands before they could strike other servants. She made a vase fall at just the right moment to distract a noble about to spill boiling water on a scullery girl. She whispered truths to the laundry boy who was being framed for stealing soap, guiding him to the real thief's hiding place. They never suspected her. She was still just Leora, silent, plain, invisible. But she was changing. One morning, while cleaning the upper halls, she paused before the grand mirror outside the throne room. She glanced up at her reflection. Her face was the same. But her eyes, they looked older, sharper. Not empty, but filled with something waiting to rise. Behind her, in the mirror, a second figure stood for only a moment. A woman in a silver gown. Then she was gone. Leora no longer walked like a slave. She still wore rags, still scrubbed floors, still carried trays and bowed her head, but now every step she took was measured. Every glance she gave was purposeful. And every word she spoke, though still few, was chosen like a stone placed in the perfect part of a river, slowly shifting the current. She had learned that revenge didn't begin with a sword. It began with silence, with patience, with watching. And she had been watching her whole life. It began with whispers. Not hers, others. The court buzzed like a beehive, filled with secrets and rumors passed in corners, behind goblets, through silk fans. Nobles underestimated those who poured their wine and swept their floors. They forgot slaves had ears. Leora heard everything. And now she remembered everything. She started small. A letter tucked beneath a nobleman's pillow, copied by hand and left anonymously in the king's study. It revealed Minister Hadros had been hoarding grain meant for the city's poor. When the news spread, the people rioted. Hadros fled the kingdom before he could be arrested. The palace called it divine judgment. No one questioned how the king had discovered the crime. Next, Leora slipped into the chamber of Lord Farron, who routinely demanded double taxes from the merchants. She left behind a pouch of coin bearing the Merchant Guild's stolen seal, one that Farron had confiscated and hidden. The guards found it the next morning. Farron was stripped of his title. Word began to spread. Someone was watching the nobles. No one knew who. No one even suspected a slave. Then came Lady Velis. Leora didn't strike quickly. She couldn't. Velis was clever, adored by many, feared by the rest. Even the king, growing weaker by the week, leaned on her counsel. But Leora knew the truth. Velis was not just cruel. She was ambitious, dangerous. And beneath her beauty was a mind sharp enough to gut a kingdom. So Leora followed the threads. She watched Velis meet with cloaked messengers late at night in the old chapel. She tracked the guards who suddenly gained coin they had no reason to have. She listened through walls, using the whispers of the necklace to catch half-sentences and full intentions. She discovered it all. The bribes. The hidden poisons. The plan to marry the king once he was too sick to resist. And eventually her aim to rule alone, once the king was no longer necessary. And she didn't act yet. She gathered proof. Slowly. Carefully. And all the while the palace began to change. The servants who used to laugh at Leora now quieted when she entered. The cook who had once slapped her hand now looked the other way when she took extra bread. Guards who used to shove past her stepped aside. They didn't know why. They just felt something. Leora had presence now. Power that couldn't be named. As if the shadows bent toward her. As if truth clung to her footsteps. The queen inside her, the one from the dreams, seemed closer each night. Sometimes when she looked in still water she saw her face, and not her face. An echo layered over her features. Eyes full of fury. A mouth pressed into regal silence. You must choose, the queen whispered in her dreams. Not just what to fight but what you become. And that voice haunted her. Because the more lies she unraveled, the more she felt a hunger rising. Not just for justice, for victory. She wanted to see Velis fall. To see her beg. To see the nobles look up at her in awe and fear. She didn't want to be invisible anymore. One night, she stood in the vault again, staring at the relics. The necklace still pulsed against her skin. Am I becoming her? She whispered aloud. No answer. But the silence weighed heavily as if asking a question of its own. Weeks passed. Then came the perfect moment. A royal ceremony. Nobles, merchants, and foreign guests packed into the hall. The king, pale and weak, barely managed to raise his hand in greeting. And beside him stood Velis, glowing in a crimson gown, the very image of control. Leora moved through the crowd with a pitcher of wine and a scroll hidden beneath her apron. She waited until the king called for a toast. Velis stepped forward to raise her glass, and Leora moved. With a graceful motion she tripped, and fell at Velis's feet, spilling wine across the polished floor. Gasps rose. All eyes turned. Velis's mouth twisted in fury. But before she could speak, a scroll tumbled from Leora's apron and rolled to the king's feet. The guards retrieved it. And the king, confused but curious, read it aloud. It contained everything. Copies of messages. Notes from servants. Lists of bribes. A statement written in careful ink. You are betrayed not by enemies, but by the one closest to your throne. Velus's face turned white. The king looked at her. Looked at the paper. Looked back. Is this true? He rasped. Velus stammered, eyes darting. But even her silver tongue could not undo what had been done. The hall exploded into whispers. Leora remained kneeling. Later, after Velus was dragged away in disgrace, screaming of lies and curses, Leora returned to the garden. She stared at the statue, her hand on the necklace. She had won. But why did it feel like something inside her had shifted too far? Was she still Leora? Or was she becoming someone else? Justice. Vengeance. Power. The lines blurred. And the web she had spun had caught more than just Velus. It had begun to catch her too. That night, the dreams didn't come gently. They roared. Leora was swept into them like a wave pulling her beneath, deeper than ever before. There was no border this time between sleep and memory, between then and now. She wasn't watching the queen anymore, she was the queen. The throne room shimmered before her, golden and terrible. Courtiers lined the walls, silent and masked by fear. At the center, the queen stood, tall, sorrowful, regal in a gown of midnight blue. And beside her, smiling sweetly like a rose with thorns, stood her sister. Valessa. The name echoed in her mind. Leora's lips spoke it, though she hadn't meant to. Valessa, the queen's younger sister, had been her dearest friend. Her blood. Her shadow in childhood, her companion in grief. But greed bloomed like rot behind her kindness. Jealous of the crown, embittered by the people's love for her sister, she whispered poison into the ears of ministers. She struck unseen. In the dream, Leora, as the queen, held a letter in her hand. A confession. Too late. Valessa's betrayal had already unfolded. Troops had been moved. Alliances severed. A slow coup masked his care. I only took what you would not protect, Valessa said in the queen's voice, a soft lilt hiding her venom. You ruled with heart. I will rule with power. Then came the punishment. But not for Valessa. No, the ministers sided with her. They feared softness. They chose cruelty masked as strength. The queen was stripped of title and name, locked in a tower to vanish from history. They planned to call her mad. To say she died of illness. To erase her from memory. She wept there for days. But not out of weakness. In her grief, she forged the only thing she had left. In the dream, Leora knelt before a blazing fire. Her hands bled. Her tears fell into molten glass drop by drop. She whispered words older than the kingdom itself, words her mother taught her, words from the time before the crown. Let justice sleep within this jewel. Let pain become power. Let no betrayal go unreturned. She shaped the glass with her hands, burning and weeping, until it held her sorrow and her rage. Until it remembered her name. That was how the necklace was born. And when it was finished, she placed it over her heart. Then the memory ended. Leora woke with a gasp, her hands trembling. The necklace lay against her chest, glowing faintly like it remembered too. She sat up slowly, dawn filtering through the tiny servant window. The garden outside swayed gently in the wind. Valessa, she whispered aloud. Not Velus, Valessa. Lady Velus, her tormentor, her enemy, her mirror, was not just cruel by chance. She was blood-born of the same line. A descendant. A legacy of the one who had betrayed the queen. And Leora, she was no longer just Leora. She was a vessel. The necklace had chosen her not by accident, but by design. She bore the same spirit, the same soul, or perhaps the same wound that had never truly healed. The queen's grief had not ended with her death. It had waited. Leora walked slowly to the mirror, drawn by instinct. She looked at her reflection, and this time there was no doubt. The image behind her wasn't a flicker. The queen stood tall and whole. Her face stern but sorrowful. Her presence radiant and cold like starlight. They locked eyes. I remember you now, Leora said, voice barely more than breath. And in the mirror the queen smiled. The necklace pulsed once, warm and certain. The past was no longer buried. The reckoning had begun. The night sky bled red. A lunar eclipse cloaked the kingdom of Arader in a strange stillness. The moon, high and trembling behind shadows, cast a rust-colored glow over the palace. The torches along the walls flickered low as if afraid of the darkness above. Leora stood in the grand hall. She had not been summoned, but the guards let her pass. They didn't understand why. Their hands froze on their swords. Their eyes dimmed when they met hers. She wasn't the servant girl anymore. She carried silence like a storm and shadows like a crown. The nobles filled the hall, draped in silk and jewels, laughter sticking in their throats as she entered. One by one their voices faltered. At the center stood Velis, now cloaked in fine crimson, radiant as ever, though her smile was tight. Her eyes narrowed as Leora approached. "You dare interrupt royal council?" she said, voice sharp as glass. "I bring judgment," Leora answered quietly. The necklace pulsed. Suddenly the room shifted. The torches surged, shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, and a low hum filled the air, a vibration through stone and blood. Then the necklace glowed, brighter than ever before. The crimson moonlight pooled onto the floor and twisted into shapes, illusions born from memory and truth. Gasps rang out. The marble hall transformed before the nobles' eyes. First, they saw Minister Corvin accepting gold in secret from foreign emissaries, promising military secrets in return. Then Lady Heinous, laughing as peasants starved during a feast, her fingers dripping in honey and wine. Another vision showed Lord Fenric setting fire to village homes for land, his soldiers laughing as women cried. More visions followed. 12, 2, each one a mirror of cruelty and betrayal. The nobles shrieked, stumbling backward. Some reached for their weapons, but the metal burned their hands, dropping with a hiss. Others dropped to their knees, eyes wide in horror at their own secrets being spilled like wine. The walls moaned with energy. The floor cracked with glowing veins of red light. The earth seemed to breathe with Leora's rage. "You were trusted," she said. "You twisted law into poison. You called it power." Several nobles tried to run. The doors slammed shut on their own. Then Velis stepped forward. Unshaken. Her voice calm but edged with fury. "This is trickery," she spat. "A servant with stolen magic. You think you are judge over us? You are nothing." Leora's eyes met hers. "No," she said. "I am the wound that never healed." The necklace flared. Fire leapt around them, yet touched nothing. Velis raised a jeweled dagger, lunging forward, faster than expected. But the moment she crossed the center of the hall, her body seized. She dropped the blade. A scream tore from her lips, not pain but loss. The necklace shone its brightest, casting Velis in silver light. Her reflection split across the polished floor, showing not just her face, but that of Velessa, the ancient betrayer. Everyone saw. The two faces merged, shimmered, then vanished. Velis staggered, gasping. Her beauty faded. Her skin turned pale, her voice cracked. Her strength melted away not from injury, but from truth. "You carry her blood," Leora whispered. "And her curse." Velis tried to rise, but her limbs were heavy, her breath short. The weight of her ancestors' betrayal had found her, and it would never leave. Leora turned from her. To the others she raised her voice, not angry but steady. "Regal, you will keep your lives," she said. "But not your titles. Not your power." One by one golden rings burned from nobles' fingers. Seals on robes vanished. The magic stripped them bare, not of clothing but of status. They would remember. And the people would remember. The necklace dimmed. Its purpose fulfilled for now. Leora walked through the hall and this time no one stopped her. The doors opened before her like parting waves. She did not look back. Outside, the moon began to return to silver. The sky breathed again. But inside the palace nothing would ever be the same. She walked alone at dawn. The palace behind her stood tall, still cloaked in silence after the night of reckoning. Nobles no longer looked down from their balconies. The once proud banners hung limp, as if mourning something old that would never return. Leora didn't glance back. She wore no crown. No fine gown. Just a plain cloak, a satchel, and the necklace, now dim, resting against her skin like a heartbeat gone quiet. It had not spoken since judgment fell. No whispers. No warmth. Just silence. She was free. Not freed by decree, nor gifted her liberty by trembling nobles. She had taken it. Walked through fire, shadow, memory, and emerged whole. As she passed the palace gates, guards bowed their heads, not by order but by instinct. In the villages beyond, children paused their play to stare. Mothers whispered behind shawls. Old men sat straighter. Some pointed. Some bowed. "She was the slave girl," someone murmured. "No," another said. "She was never just that. She walked like the queen herself." Leora did not correct them. She had no need. She passed into the hills, where trees whispered older stories, where wind carried softer truths. Her journey was not over, but this part had ended. And behind her, in the city of Arader, the legend began to grow. They spoke of a girl mocked for her rags, beaten like a beast, treated as nothing. But she had returned their cruelty with judgment. She had worn sorrow like armor. And when the moon bled red, she had made the earth remember her name. She vanished into the world beyond. But the story stayed. And in dark corners, in homes where injustice still breathed, people began to whisper. Some say the necklace now waits for the next cry in the dark.